Okay.
Makeup.
So today, kind of an interesting day. Let's look at the negatives first. The models in general are somewhat slow to break out precipitation. And I think the problem is that the forcing along the dry line is not super strong today, although I think it's going to be better than it's actually Prague. And I'll explain that a little bit why I think that is. But basically, I'm not sure if there is a strong upper impulse, although in Arizona, New Mexico, there is some cirrus flying up. So if you look at a water vapor loop, you'll see some little flare-ups of higher cirrus, and that usually indicates that there's some ascent going on. So that should time out at a good time for this region. It appears as though there might be a couple of areas of concern, both into Texas, close to here, and then up and down the dry line. And typically a day like today, dry line situations are somewhat more isolated. There'll probably be convection and something will eventually break out. So I don't think you could play any part along the dry line that's going to be absolutely bad. So what are some of the other large scale features? Well, we've got that 250 millibar kind of a wave. It's a trough, and it just turns and goes this way. And now for a music break. and so we have that turn in the upper level flow, but along that turn, I don't know, it's kind of difluent, and the winds are pretty strong even through the turn. So it's like 50 knots aloft. It's more northerly, which, you know, if you have a storm motion that's east with upper level winds to the north from the south, right, the venting is still going to occur in a fairly decent way. But I kind of like to play along that trough at 250. It seemed to be a pretty good place yesterday. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing that's going on is our 500 millibar flow, even though it's not like super solid in terms of a jet, you know, like a nosing jet out there, we basically have broad flow that's 40 to 45 knots. Now as you go more up into Kansas, the winds become more southerly, and I believe that the models even were being a little bit more aggressive with precipitation that breaks out in northern Kansas, maybe even to southern Nebraska, because I think there is some sort of a warm frontal boundary up there. So you have a pretty good warm advection regime, and warm advection implies rising air, and that destabilizes blah, blah, blah. We also don't have a super high cap today, right? I mean, again, 700 millibar temperatures are a couple degrees cooler than you would typically expect this time of year. So I think thunderstorms up along I-70 and north are probably going to be fairly common, but I don't think we need to worry about getting up that far. I don't. The better dynamics are down more toward Kansas, Oklahoma, and actually all the way down the dry line. So looking at 700 millibars, we have nice flow. I love the way the flow's coming in there with almost southwesterly winds. Amarillo's reading 40 knots from the southwest, and even down in El Paso we have 25. Further to the south, the winds at 700 millibars are definitely weaker, so I like kind of the core of the stronger winds, which would be from Kansas southward along the Red River near Childress. As far as the dew points, there's no significant dry intrusion, but there is fairly clear air behind all the convection in the clouds that'll eventually clear up, and it's starting to already. So I'm not concerned of that at all. It'll be a nice, pristine, mid-level atmosphere. 850. Let me get to my light to me up. I don't have 850. Where is it? Yeah, 850. Now 850 is interesting. We have basically broad low pressure from Wyoming, Montana, southward along the high terrain of New Mexico. That's where the trough is. Really important thing for those of you who did 850, right? We've got Dodge City at 35 knots southerly. We have Oklahoma City, which is 40 knots southerly winds, basically. And then Amarillo is at 30 knots, but it's west-southwest. And that wind, if you're doing your analysis, yes, it's a 30-knot ice attack, but you want to separate that wind because that's more of the westerly momentum, separated from the southerly jet across the Oklahoma, Kansas, North Texas. So a thermal axis is kind of nice too. The thermal axis goes from the Big Bend of Texas up through central Kansas into southern South Dakota, and the moist axis comes up just east of it. Now usually I like to see, I mean if you're going to play a traditional great severe weather setup, is you want to see a thermal axis about 50 to 100 miles west of a moisture axis. So, and that's probably what's going to happen in the way this is. You want some of the warmer conditions, maybe some of the higher mixing, reaching air to the LFC more easily through thermal mixings, and then those storms come off the dry line and get into that deeper moisture. So you start a little bit more high-based right along the dry line circulation, and then it moves to the moisture, and that's when things get a little bit more interesting. And as the evening goes on, what will happen is the winds will start to back a little bit, and the moisture will tighten up with the thermal gradient, and that's where the storms get really interesting. Given that, I think that the storms will probably somewhat initiate somewhere near that drier air, probably along the Texas-Oklahoma border and points north. So that's probably where initiation is, and then it'll move maybe 25 to 50 miles further to the east, and that's when they'll get pretty good. So what I'd like to see is ideally, what I'd like to see is some towering queues going up where we can really identify the dry line circulations, maybe around between 3 and 5 p.m. today. And that'll give us an idea of where we're seeing the best convergence, and maybe some eddies that are actually helping ascend the air along the dry line in circulations. So we'll have to watch how the dry line tightens, and it looks like it will tighten pretty well. If you looked at the Midland sounding or the Amarillo sounding, you got very dry air. Even though there's moisture at the ground, it'll mix out pretty quickly. Go to Oklahoma City, it's deep moisture. So that dry line will tighten and it'll mix eastward a little bit and then kind of stop. Tonight we'll retrogress. So I want that thermal axis, which is showing up on the surface, to be pretty decent. I think we'll get temperatures in 80s, low 80s maybe. And the dew points are going to be sitting there in the mid 60s in the moist air, so it's a really favorable environment. Shear vectors are basically coming perpendicular to the dry line, and because there's a lot of streamoid vorticity with the curved photograph, we are expecting supercells rather than splits. We don't have big straight line photographs. And what I'm hoping will happen is storms will move off the dry line, and they'll actually have a nice eastward component so that they'll move into that moist air. So I think that's going to be a favorable thing to keep isolated storms. As far as the models are concerning, the models are bringing up a little bit better thunderstorm activity from central Kansas down toward the northwest Oklahoma region. And northwest Oklahoma is about where I would think is going to be the best stuff. I think that'll be more on the southern end, and that's probably where I think the best storms will be today. As far as tonight, the models are aggressive in taking that region and increasing the SIG-TOR probabilities by 3Z, and that'll indicate that you've got the low-level nocturnal jets starting to pick up. Photographs will elongate. I don't know, we had 500
in that neighborhood. There were some like 700-800s even.
So storms will be ongoing, and we'll be in that Kansas, Oklahoma range. Probably what we'd like to do is find a hotel. I'm thinking maybe like Enid-ish. Maybe not that far. I don't know. Or maybe I was looking at Sayre or someplace, or maybe we come back into Perryton or someplace in Texas Panhandle, get a hotel for tonight. I'll worry about that a little bit later today. And I think, supercells are really going to be likely, and I think tornadoes. I think this is going to be the case. It's just a matter of being in the right place at the right time, but I'm not concerned today. Now, further to the south, could we stay around Texas and play this region? Sure, we could, but I don't think I'm gonna. Northwest Oklahoma just looks, southern Kansas looks too good. And, we've been saying Medicine Lodge, P28, for those of you who have been seeing the tweets. That's extreme southern Kansas, just in the same area we're talking. So. Medicine Lodge. Medicine Hat is in Saskatchewan, and I think that's way out of play today.
Alberta, but close
enough. It's in Alberta?
It's in Alberta, yeah.
Oh, but it's west of Moose Jaw.
It's west of Moose Jaw.
Everybody.
Moose
jaw. And we're probably going to have lunch in Canadian Texas. So
awesome.
So maybe it is Medicine Lodge hat.
Maybe medicine. Maybe I can buy a hat in Medicine Lodge.
Oh, that would be good. We could lodge a hat in the grill and call it Medicine Grill, which would be a really great name for a rock band.
We have so many rock bands.
Yeah. Or Burger Joint.
Yeah.
Yes.
Burger Joint.
So Canadian's about an hour and a half. That seems like a good place to stop for lunch. And then from there we can either go toward Woodward or go straight north into the Oklahoma Panhandle and see where the convection is. I don't even mind being a little bit west of the convection early. So we can kind of, I don't mind playing early stuff west of a dry line, as long as the dry line's not going to surge and it won't surge crazy, because that'll give us a chance to see if there's convection and where the towers are the most, and then just come in from behind it. And it'll be on the clear skies. So we can experience dry line. Now, tomorrow looks really good back in the eastern Texas Panhandle again.
It sure does.
So getting into eastern Texas tonight would be a great place to stop. There's Perryton or places like that. I think that'd be a good place to be tonight, not too much driving. And then as we continue on into the week, we have Thursday. It's looking really good. I mean, it's kind of a nice plate, and I was telling some people I want the dry air coming through, so that'll have a chance to dry out some of the surface roads. The ponding will probably still be there, and some roads will be really muddy, so we're going to be very, very careful. But at least when we pull off the vehicles, the shoulders should probably have been drying out pretty well. So that's Thursday. Friday is there's potential, again, along the dry line. It'll be more of a traditional dry line play. It doesn't look like that's a really big day. The new NAM is hitting as a pretty interesting day on Saturday, somewhere in the eastern Texas Panhandle. Now, the NAM tends to overdo the long term and make it look better, and so when it really comes out, it changes a little bit. But Pachota was saying that the dry line play on the Cap Rock looks really fantastic. And that will put us pretty far from home on Saturday night. But I think we'd all agree that's what we'd rather do. And if we can get up to the northeast Texas Panhandle, it's not that bad. Besides, we might be chasing on Sunday anyway, in northern Missouri or southern Iowa, or, I mean, it's not the greatest chase area, but if we're going to be doing a late night and we just get up and we just kind of are there, we might as well just say, look, let's just have one day where we're going to be really tired getting in very, very late on Sunday night. And that's fine by, I think, all of us. The drivers, if they get tired, who would be volunteering to drive? Plenty of people who would drive for a little while, give you an hour or two of rest. And we'll just make it home. It'll be one day of suffering. We haven't suffered yet. It's been pretty easy.
Yeah, it has.
Even last night getting home late, we saw lightning for a long time. We stopped for an easy dinner. It wasn't like we were pressing at all. What was the mileage yesterday there, Uncle Dan?
344.
What does that give us total on the trip?
I gotta look at them in. Yeah.
Somewhere.
Sorry, 377.
So somewhere probably around what, 1900?
About right.
Somewhere. Okay, so that's our briefing.